On the show today, we'll begin our focus on the global fight against corruption with the United Kingdom's Unexplained Wealth Orders and how this will impact Nigeria and Africa as a whole. We'll also look at the state of Nigeria's economy and how the country should be positioning for growth. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Market. You can also follow my Twitter handle too at Esther Ubudaga. Now, the UK Parliament passed a provision of the Criminal Finance Bill in April last year. A key section of this bill is the introduction of the Unexplained Wealth Orders, which came into effect last week. Now, this move has been hailed as a critical tool to promote the global fight against corruption and illicit flows. The Unexplained Wealth Orders will allow the UK authorities freeze and recover suspicious assets in excess of £50,000 until they've been properly accounted for by their owners. Mustafa Chike-Ob, Executive Vice Chairman of Alpha African Advisory and former CEO of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, joins me now to discuss this and more. Thank you so much, Chike. It's a pleasure to have you. So let's start with what the UK has done now, Unexplained Wealth Orders. And I know that the federal government had come up with something similar in terms of, they came up with a list of 500 wealthy Nigerians. They said they were going to work with the central bank and some agencies outside of the country to track wealthy Nigerians who have valuable assets abroad and are not declaring taxes commensurate with their wealth. So your thoughts on what the UK has done now?
I think what the UK has done is a good thing. But we must always be careful to focus on Nigerian issues and not on issues that concern the US and the UK, because they have their own issues and they're more concerned about terrorism and illicit flows of funds. I have made calculations over the last few years of the impact of corruption on Nigeria. And I can't find that corruption is more than 1 or 2% of GDP. It's not the big problem Nigerians make it to be for Nigeria. Nigeria's bigger problem is growth. And we spend all our energies chasing after 1 or 2% of GDP in the name of corruption because it's popular. Every president... You
think that's what it is? You think it's just popular?
Every president in Nigeria has come in vowing to kill corruption. Every single one of them.
But when you hear about the statistics, none comes to mind now in terms of how much is lost every year as a percentage of GDP. You put it at 1%.
I think it's 1%.
But the authorities consider it a big deal. And because for the UK in question, it's said that many of the assets, stolen money's assets, the first place is usually the UK. That's why I think there is that focus on that story.
Yeah, I saw the list of the first 10 properties they're looking at in London. And I think only 2 belong to Nigerians. The rest belong to other countries. So again, I think that it's popular to say Nigerians love it. I think that in Nigeria has the issue of, the bigger issue for Nigeria is the wealth disparity and the unproductive, ostentatious display of this wealth disparity. You see houses that people live in Nigeria, in this society, and you just want to throw a brick through a window. There's a house near where I live, it's a big white house. I cannot understand the justification for building such a monument in the midst of the suffering of Nigerians. You go to Abuja, you see all these displays of wealth. I think we should address that before we start worrying. Corruption really is a problem, but it's not the problem that everybody says it is. The biggest problem for Nigeria today is the growth of our economy. If our economy doesn't grow in double digits for a sustained period of time, nothing else will matter. We will not be able to employ. We're having, depending on who you talk to, 4 million new children in Nigeria are born a year. Who is going to employ them? We have a backlog of 20, 30 million people that are unemployed or underemployed. Who is going to employ them? The only way to employ them is to grow the GDP in double digits. Once we agree that that's what we need to do, everything else falls in line.
So you don't think we've been able to strike a balance, because that's one of the pillars of this government, that's one of the campaign promises, to fight corruption. And you don't think that, and of course that has been a focus, and they've tried to convince Nigerians that, look, we're also putting the same amount of energy into fixing the economy. Would you say that there's been an imbalance?
It's a huge imbalance. Everybody talks about corruption. Every discussion you have It's about corruption. And we promote the idea that we are not more corrupt than anybody else. 1% of GDP as corruption is probably the same amount in the US. But because they're a much bigger economy and they have and the life standards are better, people don't worry about it as much. We must get ourselves to the point. Ghana is growing its GDP at 8.4%, for goodness sake. They don't have oil. We should be able to do better than that. And once we can get that, once we start employing 4 or 5 million people in a year and making credit available to businesses and having a government that understands that business is a partnership with the government and not be in the way of business. Once we start doing those things, corruption will wither away in the same way that unproductive things do. But we spend, our entire judiciary is focused on corruption. The fight between the legislature and the executive leading to all this non-confirmation of people is anchored in the fact that AFCC has been put up as the institution where only one man in Nigeria can run. So we are focused entirely on something that's not productive. If I can grow my GDP from the 1%, 2% they're talking about now, to 10%, all these issues of corruption will go away. Let's get competent, hardworking, productive people in key areas. And let's keep an eye on corruption, but it should not be the sole purpose of the Nigerian government.
Let's talk about the economy now, some themes in the economy. Let's start with the macro environment. Yes. Looking at some of our key indicators, as you know, the authorities use to measure the growth and progress we've been making in the economy. Yes. First of all, the Naira. We've seen some stability at the FX market. Forex reserves up at 40 billion. It's been said, I know it's a 4-year high, considering where we're coming from before. Equities, the stock market is doing well. Oil production somewhere between 1.9, 2.1, 2.2 million barrels, depending on, like you said, who's providing the figures. So it would appear that the macro indicators are look positive right now. What are your thoughts in terms of how we've been able to get there and how the economic management team is going on with, making things a lot better?
None of those macroeconomic indicators you mentioned, at least the important ones, are better today than they were in 2015. Not one of them.
Okay, well, forex reserves were way below 40 billion.
You say so. But how do you measure forex reserves today? For example, we borrow 3 billion as a euro bond, and it goes into our reserves. We have 5 to 6 billion of hot money coming into the stock market. It goes into our reserves, right? So we need to
plus the oil prices have been significantly up. I mean, that should have been a huge.
Yes, but think about a situation where if we went and we borrowed 50 billion naira in a euro bond tomorrow, our reserves will go to an all-time high. Is it a realistic number? It's an obligation that you must pay back in dollars at a certain time. It should not be added to reserves. Okay, because we must pay back the euro bond in 5 years in dollars. So why is it part of our reserves? It's already committed for. So how you measure reserves is really, so I don't look at the 40 billion as a sign of an economic accomplishment. It can be 50 if they go and borrow 10 billion tomorrow. So what does that really mean for Nigerians? Moreover, 40 billion is 200 naira per Nigerian. It's nothing. Additionally, what do you use reserves for? You use it to pay for foreign goods. That's all. That's really what. So the foreigners love it when the reserves are high, because it means you can buy more of their goods and you can pay for it. The impact on the Nigerian is far more felt by the fact that to keep those reserves, you have to keep your interest rates high. You have to have a tight monetary policy. And that impact affects your businesses, it affects employment, it affects any number of things that the man on the street feels more than he feels that the reserves at 40 billion reserve doesn't do anything for the common man.
Let's quickly talk about the monetary policy, the authorities. We've seen them, focus a lot on inflation
Yes.
And many have said that that has been at the expense of growth. But the CBN governor has made it clear that, look, I'd rather keep inflation down. I'd rather maintain exchange rate stability, the Naira, at the FX market. And then, yes, we know that has depressed GDP and has depressed jobs, but I'm going to come in with some intervention schemes, partner with the likes of the Bank of Industry and some other banks that give out concessionary loans at concessionary rates to SMEs to sort of cushion the effect of the harshness that comes from those policies. And that has been the status quo, as it were. And the CBN, the authorities feel justified because they've seen inflation stabilize and come down gradually, and they feel like that has brought in a lot of, even though it's hot money, but a lot of that has come into the capital market. So I'm just thinking, what are your thoughts on that strategy in the first place? Well,
inflation is higher now than it was in 2015 by quite a bit. If you measure our monetary policy by results, they have not been successful in fighting inflation because inflation has gone up quite a bit. The fact that it went up was higher and is now coming down is still much higher than it was when they started. The Naira is at a much weaker level than when they started. The fact that it went to 520 and came back to 360, notwithstanding, it started from 199 and it's now at 360. Those are the facts. Now, at what cost are you doing those things? Is what I ask. When I was at AMCON as MD, the biggest challenge I had was people asking me for jobs for their family, friends, wards, constituents. It was a daily issue. If you talk to most Nigerian parents with children of employable age, their biggest issue is employment. Nigerians would rather be employed and have inflation of 25% than not to be unemployed. And apart from the monetary issue of employment, the civic issue of unemployment is a very serious one. Having a lot of young men unemployed wandering around is a serious civic and social issue. So when the CBN governor or whoever is making policy states that he will rather fight inflation and keep the currency at some artificially determined level versus employing 4 or 5 million Nigerians a year, is a debate we should have. It's not a decision that should be made solely by one person. Let's have that discussion. Let the CBN come out and let civil society come out and talk about it. And let us have a consensus. I think they will find that Nigerians prefer to have their people employed, gainfully employed, learning skills, producing and being productive, even if they have to deal with inflation for a few years. Okay, Mustafa, hold that thought for us. We need to take a quick break. We'll come and pick up from where we left off, especially on the jobs matter. I've been speaking to Mustafa Chike-Ob, Executive Vice Chairman of Alpha African Advisory and former CEO of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria. As we continue our discussion, still with me is Mustafa Chike-Ob, the Executive Vice Chairman of Alpha African Advisory and former CEO of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria. Mustafa, thank you for your time so far. Let's talk jobs. We're talking about jobs, and I was mentioning that the Minister of Information said a few days ago that this administration has created 7 million jobs. And I'm not sure if he meant in 2017 or so far. And he said that this administration promised 4 million jobs. Now, many questions that have been asked are, what are the quality of these jobs? And he made reference to the agriculture sector, which is labor intensive, that, we've seen a lot of jobs created across the value chain. So people ask, were they one-off jobs? Was it all farming jobs? Just like the US. But when we get a US jobs report, it's usually minus the non-farm payrolls, minus the jobs that were created in the agri sector. So obviously it's a little different here. But what are your thoughts in terms of job creation in this country? If the Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed, said it, it must be true, right? And he said that, that those facts are verifiable. I think, like I say, if he said it, it must be true. But I think that if you go to any Nigerian on the street and tell him that they've created a net of 7 million jobs in this administration, even if you go to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics and say we've had a net increase in jobs in this administration, over the last 2.5 years, I think that people will be very, very skeptical of that claim. But we'll leave that alone because the minister said it, so it must be true. But I think that we can do a much, much better job of creating jobs. And it's not productive to argue numbers that are thrown around, but we know as an economy that we have a problem with jobs, and everybody knows it. Maybe only Mr. Mohammed doesn't know that.
I wanted to talk about the fiscal authorities, but I still want to, a couple of things to clear up with the monetary authorities. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the CBN has said that, it has come up with these intervention schemes. But first of all, I would like to hear your perspective on what you would like to see the MPC do this year. They haven't been able to have the first meeting. There's no quorum yet. We don't know when this issue of the Senate confirming the nominees will be resolved. But quickly, your thoughts on that. And then secondly, what your expectations are for monetary policy this year in terms of interest rate, what you would like to see them do differently that you believe could give the economy a significant boost.
I would say this. Everybody who knows me knows that I've been arguing for much lower interest rates for a long time. This is, even during the Jonathan administration, I was arguing for much lower interest rates. So it's not a partisan matter. I would like to see interest rates in the single digits. And I don't mean MPC. I mean interest rates to consumers and to borrowers in the single digits. That's what I would like to see. I would like to see it happen quickly. Now, that's my view because I'm a growth person. I think growth is the only solution to Nigeria's economic problems. And so to spur that growth, interest rates to borrowers must be between 8 and 10%.
If you were the CBN governor, how would you make it work?
First of all, it is easily done. CBN can decide that MPC is 6% tomorrow, and it will be 6% tomorrow.
Obviously, there will be consequences.
Yes. So that's why you have to do it gradually. So you have to ask yourself, what are the consequences? The consequences are in largely 3 areas. You would likely have high inflation for a period of time, but it will be, in my opinion, a one-time effect. So it will go high and then start coming back down.
Significantly higher? We're at 15.9% now.
My guess is it will go to in the 20s.
Okay.
I'm giving you the negative effect. The second negative effect is that the Naira will probably weaken.
So the Naira is around 363 now.
You probably could see 500 again. But we didn't die at 500. We can survive 500.
But there was a significant backlash at over 500. At 520 actually.
There was significant pain in the middle class. I'm not that concerned about middle class and the elites. I'm concerned about the common man. Now, here are the benefits. You will get double-digit growth. You will get employment, 3 to 5 million employment a year, real employment a year. You will get economic activity. You will get bad loans reduced. You will also get cost of government debt service. So this money we're running around to borrow in Europe at lower rates, if you have rates here at 8% for government to borrow, then the debt service to revenue will actually reduce from the 47% that they say now to probably like 18%. Additionally, you'll have more money for the states to share, to distribute. The states will be able to pay salaries, will be able to support a minimum wage that's higher than the current 18,000. So there are a whole bunch of benefits. But yes, we are scared of the bad impact. But if you have cancer and you're doing chemotherapy, there are negative consequences of chemotherapy, but it ends up curing the cancer in most cases. So yes, we're in dire straits, and we need to have bold leadership in these matters. And if you explain to Nigerians, this is what will happen, this is why it's happening, this is the result at the end, and I will make the sacrifices too with you, so we get to the promised land together, they will listen and they will follow.
Now, some might argue that will perhaps could be the hardest part of that policy, convincing Nigerians, because Nigerians are, well, I'm not sure if I want to say this, though. Even the president has said, I mean, Nigerians are impatient. And Nigerians want to see the effect, the impact, almost immediately.
Okay, well, that's...
So I'm thinking, and then along the way, it now becomes a political issue. Because if you're looking at elections, if a couple of months away, even the following year, it will be difficult to take such decisions.
That is what leadership is about. And we need to find somebody who can make those bold leadership moves. Now, what do I expect? You just said what I expect. It's an election year. None of these, my economic dreams, will happen in an election year. But that's the ultimate answer. The ultimate answer is let's employ Nigerians. If we're going to employ Nigerians, let's give them a GDP that can employ them. And if we employ them, all your education problems will be solved. If there's a... Will it? Because we still have across the board, weak institutions, and those don't get fixed in a year or in 2 years. I'm a University of Lagos product. When I was in University of Lagos, if you came out of university with any reasonable degree, 2-1, 2-2, you were assured of a job. So we all studied very hard. I doubt if today I was in university, knowing that my degree doesn't guarantee me any jobs, that I would have studied as hard as I did. So there's a correlation between a better life and a university degree. And that correlation, once it's established, enables people to work hard for that degree. So what do students do today? They go to university, they mark time in university, because even after they graduate, there's no jobs for them. If you go to the United States of America, businesses go to universities to look for graduates. I went to Stanford Business School, and in my graduating year, over 200 companies came to recruit at Stanford Business School. Here, people graduate. I can't believe that Access Bank or GT Bank sends recruiters to University of Lagos to look for employees. Until we establish the link between a university degree and a better life through employment, students will not study hard. The universities will be weaker. Businesses will not fund universities. And so there's a link between that and that.
No, there's also another question that's been thrown out that for the African youth. Do we find jobs? Do they find jobs or become entrepreneurs, create the jobs themselves? And I think that there's a strong push towards entrepreneurship. We have number of foundations, that give out cash, mentorship, etc. Because it looks like, looking down into the future, many analysts tell us that, look, in the future, there won't be jobs. It's going to be what can you do? How innovative can you be?
I love when people say that. Entrepreneurs employ people too. So when they say entrepreneur, it seems as if people think it's a sole entrepreneur running a business. I know a lot of brilliant entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, but they employ people. And their complaint is that the people that they're looking for are not very well equipped even to help them in their businesses. And that, again, goes back to the fact that people are not expecting jobs. So in AMCON, we had 300 jobs, and I think we had about 500,000 applications. Those are impossible odds. So again, for me, the priorities in the economy are growth, employment, productivity. These are the only three things that matter to me. For the rest, I'm willing to manage them and sacrifice and work and keep them, the bad things, down. But we must have growth, we must have employment, and we must have productivity.
No.
And how that is done is the challenge for our economic leadership.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. We appreciate your time. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
I've been speaking to Mustafa Chike-Ob, Executive Vice Chairman of Alpha African Advisory and former CEO of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria.